In this lesson, we will learn about components, one of the most important concepts in React. To begin, let's compare this concept to traditional web development. In traditional web development, we use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build projects. The smallest unit of development is the web page. Websites are made up of multiple web pages. However, this approach has a problem. It makes it difficult to reuse parts of the code that are repetitive or similar. When we learned JavaScript, the concept of modules was introduced to address this issue. For example, let's say we have an index.js file with a lot of code. As the logic grows, the code in this file becomes increasingly long and complex, with many similar parts are repeatedly written. To handle this, we can separate frequently used code into smaller JavaScript files. Each file can handle specific logic or independent functionalities. By doing this, we can easily call these modules anytime and anywhere needed. In summary, JavaScript modules are programs that provide specific functionalities and are usually represented as individual JavaScript files. When front-end developers talk about modules, they are usually referring to standalone JavaScript files with specific functionalities. Components go a step further than modules. In our first lesson, we mentioned that component is a collection of code and resources used to implement specific functionality. It's not just about breaking down JavaScript files. Components also separate resources like HTML, CSS, images, and, when using React, even JSX code. Let's revisit the challenge from our last lesson. In that challenge, our JSX code was stored in a variable, while the CSS was in separate files. Does it a component? No, it doesn't. Why not? Because all of the code is still bundled together, making it hard to maintain. When you need to make changes, you have to get into a large block of code to find what you are looking for. For now, the code may be simple, but as the complexity grows, it becomes even harder to maintain. Secondly, it's not reusable. For instance, if I wanted to reuse this item div, I'd have to copy and paste it, which is inconvenient and doesn't reduce the code base. So we only write code like this for exercises. In real-world development, this approach isn't practical. Then how do we write this code using components? Here, let me declare in advance. React supported two ways of creating components: functional components and class components. However, in recent years, React has been deprecating class components. As of React19, the official document explicitly states that class components are not recommended. Therefore, this course will focus only on functional components. If anyone is interested in learning about class components, feel free to leave a comment. If there's high demand, I can create a separate video to cover them briefly. For now, let's stick to functional components. So, what are functional components? In one sentence, a functional component is a plain JavaScript function that returns JSX. So it's just a function and it returns JSX. For example, I can create a function called app that returns some JSX. Let me comment out this to-do first. Hello, React. Pay attention here. the name of a functional component must start with an uppercase letter. This is a crucial rule in React. If the name starts with a lowercase letter, React will treat it as a standard HTML tag. It's only when the name starts with an uppercase letter that React recognizes it as a custom component and looks for its definition. Now that we've written a functional component, how do we use it? We render it using the method we learned earlier. First, create a React root, and then render the content, which we call app here, and the returned JSX will be rendered. Let's start the development server to check if it works. npm run dev. Great, it works. Now, let me make a small change. Notice how I rewrite the function call using a self-closing tag. This means we are treating the function as a component during rendering. Let's see if it works. If I add an exclamation mark, you'll see the output changes accordingly, which means it works. So, since both ways work, should we render components as function calls or as tags? Please remember, we should always use tags. Here's why. If you use a function call like app, React cannot manage the component lifecycle or the virtual DOM properly. Moreover, hooks will fail because React doesn't recognize function call as part of its rendering tree. But we haven't learned lifecycle and hooks yet, so here we just remember when use components, we should write them as tags. At this point, we've created a functional component. However, our current approach isn't ideal because we've written the component directly in main.jsx. In real-world development, we often create numerous components. Placing them all in one file would make the codebase bloated and difficult to manage. The solution is to move components into separate files. For instance, let's comment out the app component in main.jsx and create a new file called app.jsx in the src directory. In this file, instead of using the keyword function, I also can use an arrow function. After writing the component, we need to export it so it can be imported elsewhere. So write like this: export default app. This exports the app component as the default export. Then in main.jsx, import it like this: import app from /, which means the same directory, then app or app.jsx. Now the external component is successfully imported and rendered. Cool. So in this lesson, we introduced React components. In the next lesson, we will rewrite the code from our last lesson using function components. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.